Standard procedure is a chemical capture, Terry Winslow said. End of discussion. Two men leaned on the bridge rail above him, nodding at nothing in particular. Below, in the shadows under the concrete span, something small moved against the far support wall. Wilbur Arsenault stood on the gravel shoulder 20 feet back from the railing. Nobody had looked at him yet. He hadn't spoken. He wasn't watching Winslow. He was watching the dog. From 30 yards out, he had already angled his body sideways to the animal, dropped his gaze below the sightline, let his shoulders round forward. Slow, deliberate. Each adjustment quiet as a man settling into a chair. His hands rested loose at his sides. The carved walking stick leaned against his left leg. The puppy, half visible in the shadows, had stopped trembling. Nobody at the rail noticed. They were still talking about dart guns. Standard procedure is a chemical capture. End of discussion. Winslow said it again, louder this time, as if volume would settle the matter. The two neighbors leaned against the bridge rail and nodded in the way people nod when they don't agree but can't think of a counter-argument. Winslow's officer, a younger man named Elias, was already walking back toward the county truck to pull the equipment case. Wilbur had already left the gravel shoulder. Nobody saw him go. That was the point. He came down the bank at an angle, not toward the puppy, but across from it, moving parallel to the water, his boots finding the flat rocks without rushing. His body turned so his right shoulder led, and his face was angled toward the far bank. The walking stick went into the mud beside him when he crouched, 6 feet from the water line, and his hand found the notch near the grip the way a man finds a light switch in the dark. One touch. He didn't look at it. Then his hand dropped to his knee. He had made that same notch 11 years ago with his folding knife, sitting at the field corner with the ground still turned over and soft. And he had not been sure then that he would ever get up off that particular piece of earth. He got up. He kept walking the fence line. He kept touching the notch, mornings when he turned at that corner, because the walk was a promise he had made to something bigger than grief. And promises didn't stop keeping themselves just because the one you'd made them with was gone. The walking stick held that in a way he had never tried to put into words. None of which was visible to the people on the bridge. What was visible was an old man in a dirty tan coat crouching in creek mud for no apparent reason. "Hey," one of the neighbors called down. "Sir, what are you—" Wilbur didn't answer. Not rude, just not available. He let his gaze settle on the gravel 6 inches in front of his boots, not on the puppy, anywhere but the puppy. The dog was back under the bridge's shadow, maybe 8 feet in, and Wilbur could see it clearly enough in his peripheral vision without turning his head. A young animal, 5 or 6 months at most, with the tight, hollow look of something that had stopped eating 3 days ago, but hadn't stopped hoping. The ears told him things. The distribution of weight on the front legs told him other things. The way it had gone quiet when he dropped his gaze told him the most important thing. It was watching him. Not with threat, with the particular suspended attention of an animal that has learned not to trust anyone and cannot quite stop wanting to. Wilbur breathed out slowly through his nose. He let his shoulders drop another inch, made himself smaller, rounder, less like a decision and more like a feature of the landscape. On the bridge above, Winslow was explaining dart gun calibration to Elias with the satisfaction of a man who knows the correct procedure and intends to use it. Standard procedure is a 15-minute sedation window. We go in, we bag it, we're done before the afternoon. The puppy had not moved, but its weight had shifted, barely, forward. Wilbur saw it. He let it mean nothing on his face. He lowered his chin another fraction and waited, still, deliberate, unhurried, the way a man waits who has spent 20 years learning that patience was not a passive thing. It was a language, It had grammar and syntax and a particular quiet vocabulary that most people never learned because they could not stop filling silence with their own noise. He did not know what this dog had lost. He knew what it felt like to lose it. The puppy had not moved in 4 minutes. It crouched at the back edge of the shadow, where the concrete met the creek bank in a narrow triangle of mud and dead grass. 3 days under that bridge had given it a certain ownership of the space. It knew every sound the water made, every vibration from the road above. Wilbur could see that in the way its ears moved. Not frantic sweeping, catalogued. This one had been paying attention. The left ear dropped slightly when a car passed overhead. The right stayed half up, angled toward him. That asymmetry told him something. Fear in the left channel, interest in the right. The dog was running 2 separate calculations at once, which meant it was not purely reactive. It was thinking. He timed his next exhale to the dog's rib cage. Nobody watching from the road would have seen that. It looked like an old man crouching in the mud doing nothing. That was fine. Wilbur had spent most of his adult life doing things that looked like nothing. He thought about the fence line. He thought about it the way you think about a place you've walked so many times it lives in your legs instead of your memory. 11 years of the same quarter mile, same order. The east gate first, then the low corner where the ground goes soft after rain, then the long stretch of cedar posts to the flat stone at the field's edge. The stone was not marked. He had not seen the need to mark it. He knew where it was. That was enough. The stick had 1 notch near the grip. He'd cut it himself the morning after with a folding knife he still carried. Not to remember. He was never going to forget. He'd cut it because he needed to do something with his hands that day, and the alternative was worse. Cord had worked 11 years beside him, through 2 deployments and a third that nobody put a name on officially. Through field dressing stations in the dark, where the ground was cold and the work was fast, and you learned to keep your hands moving because stopping meant thinking, and thinking could wait. Cord had been the last one he'd trained from a pup, the last one he'd cleared for duty, patched up in the field and brought home. The only one he'd been with at the end. The flat stone sat 40 yards from where he was crouching now, give or take. Past the fence, past the low ground. He touched the notch every morning at that corner. Not because he'd decided to, because his hand did it before his mind arrived. The puppy's tail shifted, just a fraction. Low, slow, not wagging, nothing that optimistic. But the tucked curl had softened by a degree. The right ear came up a little more. Wilbur let his weight settle. He breathed out, long and even, and let his shoulders drop with it. He kept his eyes at the dog's chest, not its face. Direct eye contact was pressure. He was not here to apply pressure. The tail shifted again. Up on the road, he could hear one of the neighbors saying something, and then Winslow's voice cutting over it. Something about the dart gun, about standard procedure, about liability. The words bounced off the bridge concrete and fell into the creek without touching Wilbur at all. He was watching the ear. He was watching the way the puppy's breathing had begun, almost without the dog knowing it, to match the rhythm he was holding. 3 days alone under a bridge. 3 days of strangers' voices and boots on the gravel and hands reaching. Something had happened to this dog before any of that. Something that had made trust into a thing that had to be rebuilt from nothing, one quiet breath at a time. Wilbur understood that completely. He had been rebuilding things from nothing for 11 years. The county truck came in off the road with its amber light turning. No siren, just the slow official roll of something that had decided the matter already. Terry Winslow stepped out before the engine fully quit. Mid-40s, shoulders back, the particular posture of a man who narrated his own authority to himself all day and found it convincing. He pulled on a pair of orange-trimmed gloves as he walked, snapping each cuff with a practiced flick. He saw the crowd at the rail first, then the animal control officer, who straightened like a student caught off task. Then Wilbur, down on the creek bank, crouched in the mud below the bridge lip, canvas coat hanging open, an old wooden walking stick pressed into the bank beside him. Winslow stopped at the top of the slope. He looked at Wilbur the way a man sizes up something that doesn't belong to the scene he'd already arranged in his head. Then he came down. "Sir." His voice was trained for outdoor use, full, carrying, the kind that expected to travel. "Standard procedure is not for civilians to be in the capture zone. I'm going to need you to come back up to the road." He had a dart kit in a hard-sided case. He set it on a flat rock behind him without looking, already cataloging the distance to the bridge, the angle, the width of the opening. Wilbur looked up. Not quickly, not sharply. He just turned his gaze from the dog to Winslow and held it there one beat longer than the exchange required. Not hostile, not wounded, just level. The kind of eye contact that has no need of the next word. Winslow blinked first. He covered it by looking down at his kit. Wilbur rose from his crouch without hurry, picked up the walking stick. The fingers of his left hand found the notch near the grip as he came upright. A brief press, the way a man fingers a rosary bead in a coat pocket. Not for anyone watching, just for the count. Then he stepped back from the bank and moved up the slope 10 feet and stopped there, on the gravel at the edge of everything, and said nothing at all. Winslow looked at him once more, uncertain in a way he wouldn't have been able to name. Then he turned to his officer. "Right. Standard procedure is chemical capture when subjects have refused contact for more than 48 hours. What's our sight line?" The officer began pointing. The neighbors at the rail leaned in to listen, because an official plan gave them something to do besides stand there feeling useless. A young man named Elias, 20-something, one of the neighbors who'd been here since the first morning, stayed back from the group. He was watching Wilbur. Wilbur wasn't watching Winslow. He was watching the bridge. Or rather, he was watching the shadow below the bridge, the small, dark shape that had not moved while all this happened. The puppy was listening. Every voice was another variable. Every footstep on the gravel above was data it was filing, with whatever it had left of trust. Winslow's dart kit had a soft snap latch. He popped it now, and the sound crossed the water clean as a stone dropped in a still place. Under the bridge, the small shape shifted, pressed further back against the concrete. Wilbur breathed out slowly through his nose. Elias watched the old man's face and saw nothing readable there. Not anger, not resignation, just attention. The particular quality of it belonging to someone who was still counting options the rest of them hadn't thought to look for. The question sat in the air between them, unasked. Elias would ask it later. Right now, he only knew that the man standing quietly on the gravel beside him was not what he appeared. He did not know what he was exactly. But the dog, he thought, might. Winslow moved down the creek bank with the confidence of someone who had done this before and expected it to work the same way it always had. His officer followed with the equipment case, and for a moment, the two of them were almost choreographed. The careful lateral approach, the low crouch, the extended hand with nothing in it. Textbook. Practiced. The puppy went flat against the far concrete wall. Not a slow retreat, an instant one. Weight dropping, haunches tucking. The whole animal pressing itself into the shadow like it wanted to become part of the stone. A sound came from it, barely audible from the road. Not a growl, something older than a growl. Winslow held position, gave it 30 seconds, tried another step. The puppy didn't bolt outward. It went further back, wedging itself into the narrowest angle where the bridge footing met the creek bed. And the trembling that had been visible from 20 yards was now a whole body shudder, even from the road. Elias watched from the rail above. He had been watching Winslow because Winslow was the one making things happen. But somewhere in the last 2 minutes, his eyes had drifted, almost without his choosing, back to the old man on the gravel shoulder. Arsenault stood where Winslow had left him, hadn't moved, hadn't crossed his arms or checked his phone or done any of the things a man does when he's been dismissed and is deciding whether to be annoyed about it. He was just watching the dog. Not watching Winslow, the dog. His head was tilted, maybe 5 degrees. His weight had shifted imperceptibly to his right foot. And those hands, Elias noticed the hands again, were loose at his sides, not resting, not fidgeting, just present in a way that looked like they were waiting for instructions no one had given yet. Elias had seen something like this once, not in person, in photographs his uncle kept in a shoebox. His uncle, who had done 2 years working alongside military dog teams and talked about the handlers the way some men talk about surgeons. That quality of attention, not alertness exactly, something quieter, something that moved at the same speed as the thing being watched. He took his phone out, not to call anyone yet. He opened the Veterans Association page his uncle had sent him once, months back, during a conversation about something else entirely. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He typed the county name, the word agricultural, the year range that would put a man in his early 70s at the right age. He wasn't sure why he was doing this with any urgency. Below, Winslow had retreated 2 steps. He was talking to his officer in a low, flat voice. And even from the road, Elias could parse the cadence of it. The specific rhythm of a man rebuilding his case for what he already wanted to do. The DART kit, the chemical capture. Standard procedure, circling back to the beginning. The puppy had not moved from the far wall. 3 days it had refused every approach. The neighbors said the fire department had tried, an animal rescue volunteer, someone's aunt who swore she had a way with dogs. 3 days of good intentions and extended hands and soft voices. And the dog had moved exactly as far back as it needed to each time, no more. Waiting with a patience that felt less like fear and more like grief. Elias scrolled. The association page had rosters, photographs, unit histories. He narrowed the search. Added a term his uncle had used once. Veterinary Corps. He found a photograph. He didn't say anything yet. He just studied it for a moment, then looked at the man on the gravel shoulder, then back at the photograph. The posture in the image was unmistakable, even 30 years back, even in uniform. His thumb hovered over the screen. Winslow was still talking about the dart gun. Standard procedure is a 2-person retrieval once the animal is sedated, Winslow was saying, turning the dart injector over in his hands with the practiced ease of a man who wanted you to notice how practiced he was. 1 secures the hindquarters, 1 takes the head. You do not want an unsecured animal coming up out of sedation during transport, I can tell you that much. Had an officer lose 2 fingers that way, county over. Standard procedure exists for a reason. His officer nodded, writing nothing down. Wilbur had already moved. No one saw him decide to do it. That was the thing about it. Later, when people tried to describe what happened, there was no moment where he stood up and walked forward. He was simply somewhere else, and then he was at the creek bank, and then he was lowering himself into the mud on 1 knee, and the whole sequence was so unhurried that it took the watching neighbors a full 3 seconds to understand he had ignored everything Winslow had just said. The walking stick went into the mud beside him. His hand found the notch on it without looking, held there a breath, released. Then he started talking. Not loud, not soft exactly, something between a low, rhythmic cadence that had no particular words in it at first, just sound, just shape. The same phrase length repeated with the same rise and fall, the way you'd hum a thing you can't quite remember the words to. It came from somewhere behind his sternum. It wasn't for the people on the bridge. The puppy stopped moving. Up on the road, one of the neighbors touched the other one's arm without looking at them. Winslow's explanation of the retrieval protocol died mid-clause. The officer stopped nodding. Under the bridge, the puppy had been pressed against the far abutment, that gray smear of fur they'd been watching for 3 days, the thing that wouldn't come and wouldn't leave. Its ears had been flat since Winslow's first approach. Now, one of them lifted. Just one. Rotating forward on its own, independent of the other, the way a dog's ear moves when something has reached it below the level of threat. Wilbur kept talking. Same cadence, same rise, same fall. He hadn't looked at the dog yet. His gaze was down and to the left, aimed at the mud, taking the puppy out of his direct visual field, the way you take a gun off someone to let them breathe. His body was turned at the same angle it had been for the last hour, open, unthreatening, smaller than a man his size should look. He had made himself into something the puppy could approach if it wanted to. The second ear came up. "What is he?" one of the neighbors started, and Winslow put a hand up for quiet. It was the most self-aware thing Winslow had done since he arrived. The puppy took one step forward, then stopped, then took 2 more. It was trembling. You could see it from the road, the fine, all-over shiver of an animal that has been alone and afraid for too long, that has been approached wrong too many times, that has stored up 3 days of bad experiences and is spending every bit of its nerve on these 2 steps toward an old man in a muddy coat. Wilbur breathed out slow. The cadence continued, unbroken. His hands were loose at his sides, open-palmed, not reaching. Elias Horowitz stood at the bridge rail and looked at his phone screen. The photograph. The man in uniform. The German Shepherd in full working dog kit. Vest, leads, the dog's head angled up toward its handler with an attention that looked, even across 30 years and a low-resolution scan, like faith. He looked up at Winslow. Winslow was watching Wilbur. His dart kit was at his feet. He had not picked it up. Elias turned the phone screen toward him. He trained military working dogs for the Army for 22 years. Elias kept his voice low. Not to protect Winslow, just so the sound didn't carry to the creek bank. Winslow looked at the screen. The photograph was not sharp, a scanned print. The colors shifted toward yellow the way old photos do. But the figure was unmistakable. A younger version of the same man, 20 or 30 pounds heavier, back when the canvas coat was a uniform blouse. He was standing at the left edge of a group, a German Shepherd at his left knee, the dog in full working kit, harness, lead, head up and forward. The dog's ears were high. The man's shoulders were squared. The posture between them was something more than handler and animal. It was the posture of 2 things that had learned to read the same world. Winslow's mouth was still open from the sentence the photograph had interrupted. He closed it. Below them, on the creek bank, Wilbur had not moved. Still in the mud at the bridge's edge, one knee down, his voice barely audible from the road. A low, unhurried cadence that had no urgency in it at all. The kind of sound that doesn't ask anything, just exists in the air for the other thing to decide about. The puppy had not come closer, but it had stopped pressing itself into the corner of the footing. Its nose was working. Winslow looked from the phone to the man. He had sized Wilbur up in 3 seconds when he arrived. Tan coat, worn boots, age, civilian, amateur. He had filed it all away in that first sweep, the automatic triage of someone who needs to move fast and can't afford complications. The DART kit had confirmed the filing. Standard procedure did not have a slot for old farmers who showed up uninvited. The German Shepherd in the photograph looked back at him from the phone screen. Winslow set the dart gun down against the tire of his truck. He did not announce the decision. He just put it down. Elias did not say anything else. He had said the one thing. The photograph was doing the rest of the work. The county officer beside Winslow was watching the creek bank, not the phone. She had been watching Wilbur since he walked back down without permission, since the puppy had frozen at the sound of that voice. She had been in the job 4 years. She had seen 3 chemical captures, and they had all ended the same way. The animal, unconscious, rigid with shock, loaded into a crate, and traumatized in a way that took weeks to undo, if it ever fully did. She had not said this aloud. It was not her call to make. Down on the bank, the cadence continued.
It was not words, exactly. Or it was words arranged so that the meaning didn't matter, only the rhythm. The way a heartbeat is steady information, not instruction. Wilbur's hands rested open on his knees. His coat hung loose. He had not reached for anything, had not offered anything. He was just present in the mud, breathing at the speed of something that had nowhere else to be. The puppy took 1 step forward, a single step. Then it stopped. Its ears shifted, the near one forward, the far one sideways, and it held that uncertain angle while its nose worked the air between them. 3 days under a bridge. 3 days of boots and voices and people trying to solve it from above. Winslow watched. He was standing with his hands at his sides, the dart kit at his feet where he'd left it, the unit photograph still glowing on Elias's phone. The weight of what he'd almost done was settling into him the way cold does, slowly, from the outside in. Down in the mud, Wilbur said nothing. The cadence held. The puppy's ears were back, not flat. Not the full surrender of an animal that's given up, but low and angled, listening for something the creak and the road noise kept interrupting. Its muzzle was down. The trembling had changed register, gone from the sharp kind to the deep kind, the shaking that comes from somewhere below muscle. Wilbur read all of it. He had gone lower in the mud, his left knee taking the weight, his right boot finding something solid in the silt. The walking stick lay beside him where he'd left it. He didn't need it now. He needed both hands free and both hands quiet. The cadence never stopped. 12 years of doing it in the dark, in the noise of working kennels, in the chaos of field triage. It had become something below conscious thought. Not words exactly. A rhythm with soft consonants at the edges. The kind of sound that bypasses a fear-bonded animal's decision-making entirely and lands somewhere older. Somewhere that predates the fear. He let his right hand settle into the mud, palm up. Not extended, not offered exactly, just present. At ground level, below the line of his own body, below the line of the puppy's gaze. The trick, the one no manual he'd ever read explained correctly, was to make the hand into something that required nothing in return. Not patience. Patience was still a kind of waiting with an agenda. This was different. This was the hand of a man who had already decided the outcome didn't belong to him. The puppy's nose lifted. 1 short pull of air. 2. Nobody on the road moved. Winslow's breath was audible from 6 feet behind and above. Elias had gone completely quiet. Wilbur dropped his gaze another degree, gave the dog the side of his face instead of the front. An old protocol, older than the Army program that had formalized it. The instinct that the animal reads frontal eye contact as challenge and peripheral vision as safety. He learned it first from a shepherd named Kira, before Cord, before any of it. She'd taught him more about fear than any course he'd ever taken. The puppy took 1 step.
It was small, maybe 8 inches of ground, but its weight shifted forward, and that meant the decision had already been made somewhere the step hadn't caught up to yet. Wilbur kept breathing. Slow out, longer than the inhale. The exhale was the part that mattered. It carried something the animal measured without knowing it measured it. He'd tried to explain that once, to a young handler in the 3rd year of Wilbur's last posting. The kid had nodded without really hearing it. The dog had taught him the rest. 3 more steps, and the puppy's nose reached the edge of his hand. It didn't sniff. It pressed. The whole soft bridge of its muzzle into his upturned palm, hard enough that Wilbur felt the tremble of it travel up his wrist. He held the hand exactly where it was. No response, no reward. Just the hand, still there, the same as it had been before the dog chose it. Then the puppy folded, not collapsed, folded, the way an exhausted animal finally trusts a surface enough to let it hold weight. Its legs went under it in a slow, deliberate descent, and its face found Wilbur's chest, and the trembling ran through it once more, hard, the way a fever breaks. And then it stopped. The puppy's breathing evened out. Its ears came up just slightly. The low, drawn-down weight of 3 days alone under a concrete bridge released out of its body like something that had been held under water finally let go. Wilbur put his left arm around it, slowly, 1 degree at a time. Nobody said anything. The puppy breathed against him, small, ragged breaths, getting slower. Wilbur let it breathe. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't do anything but hold the weight of it and let his own heartbeat do the work his voice had already finished.
After a while, he reached out with his free hand and found the walking stick in the mud. He got his feet under him, one knee, then the other, then up, slower than he used to be, the creek bank not cooperating, and he carried the puppy out from under the bridge and into the afternoon light. The dog made a sound low in its chest, something between a whimper and a sigh, and then pressed its face harder against Wilbur's coat and went quiet. Winslow was at the bank's edge. His officer had taken a step back. The 2 neighbors from the road were watching from the gravel shoulder with their hands in their pockets, and nothing useful to say, which was the first sensible thing they'd managed all afternoon. Elias met Wilbur at the top of the bank, one hand out in case the footing gave way, but Wilbur didn't need it. He came up steady, the stick taking his weight, and he paused there in the low sun with mud to both knees and a trembling dog against his chest. "How did you know what to do?" Elias asked. He said it quietly, the way you ask a question when you already understand most of the answer but need to hear the rest of it. Wilbur looked down at the dog. The puppy's ear twitched toward his voice. He touched the notch on the walking stick. He didn't look at his hand when he did it. He never did. "I know, son," he said, not loud, not for anyone else. "I know what it's like to lose the one person you trusted." Elias didn't ask him to say more. He had been on the phone long enough. He had seen the photograph. He understood that the notch was 11 years old, and that the flat stone at the edge of Wilbur's fence line had a name on it, and that the man carrying this dog had spent 40 years in forward operating conditions, reaching animals that had been broken by loss and fear, and the particular violence of environments that don't forgive mistakes. He understood, too, that none of it had ever fully left. Some things you learn in the company of a partner, and when the partner's gone, the learning stays, but the weight of it has nowhere else to go. Winslow came around the front of the truck. He wasn't carrying the dart kit anymore. He stopped a few feet off, turned his hat in his hands once, and then looked at Wilbur. "What should I have done differently?" he asked. The bluster was gone. The procedural narration was gone. He sounded like a man who had just watched something he didn't have a category for and was honest enough to say so. Wilbur considered him. No hurry in it. "Less talking," he said. "More listening.
To the dog first, then to the people who've been where the dog's been. Winslow nodded. Once. He didn't try to answer it. The puppy shifted in Wilbur's arms, turned its head, and looked out at the light. Its ears came up slightly. Not fear, not threat assessment, something closer to curiosity. The first curiosity it had shown in 3 days. Wilbur felt the change in it. The small unclenching. He recognized it the way you recognize something you have felt before, a long time ago, in your own chest. The first moment after a loss so deep you stopped believing anything could reach you, when something finally does. He adjusted his grip on the walking stick and started for home. That night the barn smelled of dry straw and old wood, and the faint sweetness of horse blankets brought down from the loft. The puppy had eaten, not much, but some, and turned 3 slow circles before dropping into the nest Wilbur had made in the corner stall. 1 ear folded under, 1 ear up. Wilbur stood in the doorway with the walking stick leaned against the frame beside him. The last light was going out of the sky in layers, the way it does over flat farmland. Orange fading to a gray so soft it was almost kind. He didn't go in. Didn't go back to the house. Just stood there with his hands loose at his sides, watching the small chest rise and fall. The puppy's paws moved once in some private dream of running. 11 years was a long time to walk a fence line alone. He hadn't planned on stopping. He wasn't sure he could explain what had changed, or if he'd try. He reached out without looking and touched the notch on the stick. Once. The way you touch something to confirm it's still there. The way you keep a promise. The ear stayed up all night.